Okay, well, welcome to the third installment of the WRJ Advocacy webinar series. Thank you so much for all of you joining us today. My name is Allison Mallinger. I am the WRJ Advocacy and Communications Associate. And it is my pleasure to introduce Susanna Cohen, who is the WRJ RAC Legislative Assistant who focuses on women's rights and economic issues. And she'll be moderating this session today. So with that, Susanna, I will turn it over to you.
Hi, thank you so much, Allie, and thank you everyone for joining. We're very excited to have this installment of our monthly webinar series that is part of the Wrj Women Act campaign. So just to tell you a little bit of background on Wrj Women Act, we started this project in early 2017 to act as a framework for action. In the advocacy plan that was put out as part of this project, we explained that we are setting out to prioritize and focus our energy and maximize our capacity to mobilize our members. So in this particularly tumultuous time, we wanted to offer some guidance on where our efforts are best spent. And as part of the project, we identified 6 high priority issues. These include pay equity and fair wages, women's health and reproductive rights, violence against women, economic justice, Israel, and finally, immigration reform and refugee rights for refugees and asylum seekers. These priorities were accompanied by suggestions for events and programs and are intended to guide Sisterhood's advocacy. And of course, one of them is immigration, which, as many of you may know, has been in the news a lot lately and is particularly prominent right now in the national political dialogue. So we are very lucky to have 2 people who are extremely involved in the fight for immigration reform on our webinar today. First, we have Sana Abrar. Sana is the Policy and Advocacy Manager at United We Dream. United We Dream is the largest immigration youth-led group in the nation. The group organizes and advocates for the dignity and fair treatment of immigrant youth and families, regardless of immigration status. And next, we have Elizabeth Leff, who is a current legislative assistant at the Religious Action Center for Reform Judaism. Her portfolio focuses on social justice issues, having to do with international issues for the most part, but immigration has been a big part of her work thus far this year. She is also part of the Urgency of Now Immigrant Justice Campaign, which is pushing for state and federal level comprehensive immigration reform. So thank you so much to Sana and Elizabeth for joining us today. We are very much looking forward to your presentations. First up, we have Sana, and she will discuss the history and current state of immigration legislation. So Sana, please take it away.
Hi, everyone. It's a pleasure to join you all today. I want to first start off with thank you. So thank you to the folks facilitating this webinar. And thank you especially to all of you participants for already having plugged into this crucial fight to protect immigrant communities, and also being a part of this webinar in order to figure out more ways that you can plug into this fight, especially as we're coming down to crunch time, right? It's the end of the year and we're ready to win this battle. So as was mentioned before, I work at United We Dream, which is an immigrant youth-led organization that works to defend the rights of immigrant communities throughout the nation, regardless of status. I think what's particularly relevant here is the fact that we represent youth from all across the board, whether it has to do with representing groups who come from different socioeconomic backgrounds, religious backgrounds, and also representing the ethnic diversity of undocumented youth in this nation. I wanted to start off a bit on just kind of doing a bit of a roundup on what we are facing right now in this political climate. Here you'll see on this slide, it's not exactly the happiest slide, but I wanted to kind of put together just a brief summary of what we have been facing as an immigrant community, as a network of allies, as individuals who are truly invested in this fight for justice. to start off with the advent of the Trump campaign last year, there was quite a bit of rhetoric and derogatory remarks about immigrant communities and people of color. And what we have found to be very true with this administration is that that was not just talk. That talk was converted into action, which has taken quite a toll on immigrant communities across the board. You all have seen the executive orders that have come down with the several reiterations of the Muslim bans. Early in January, also, the president signed an executive order expanding priorities for removal and deportation, essentially stating that anyone who has undocumented status, regardless of any kind of criminal background or any other I should say, details related to their personal livelihoods, they are a priority for removal. This differs quite a bit from what we were facing during the Obama administration, in which the administration, though still problematic, was focusing deportations and raids on individuals believed to be a security threat on the basis of essentially criminal felonies. We, during the Obama administration, were working to fight against the criminalization of immigrant communities, and now we find ourselves facing an even bigger battle when essentially all of our people who are undocumented have become targets for removal. Also in January, there was an executive order passed that essentially ordered for an unprecedented increase in deportation agents, those being increases in agents of ICE, or Immigrations and Customs Enforcement, and Border Patrol agents. We've also seen this year in severe increases in raids and arrests throughout the country, even more than we saw during the previous administration. And then we also see not only the actions being taken on the ground, but this work being codified into legislative language, that being, for example, the DHS budget. You all may have seen that back earlier in the year, the administration proposed billions of dollars to go to DHS, which included increases in expanding detention centers and the private prison industrial complex that funds them, in increasing the numbers of agents in ICE and CBP, as well as provisions to build a southern border wall. We've also seen attacks on the TPS community, TPS, temporary protected status. This covers individuals who have been here for years, who have fled from countries on the basis of natural disaster or being persecuted by local governments. For example, I believe it was 2 weeks ago that the Department of Homeland Security made the decision that they would be ending temporary protected status for 57,000 Hondurans. In their announcement, they essentially gave Hondurans who are covered by TPS right now 1 year, just 12 months, to take the time to figure out their plans for leaving the country once their TPS expires. We are still waiting on decisions on other countries and TPS, those countries being Nicaragua, Haiti, and El Salvador, which are coming up in the next few weeks to few months. We've also seen attacks on what is called legal immigration, so individuals who have been able to qualify for the diversity visa lottery, which covers primarily immigrants of African, Muslim, Arab American, and South Asian descent, as well as the introduction of the Wrj Act in Congress, which has been backed by the administration, which severely cuts green cards and also codifies cuts in refugee admissions. In terms of refugee admissions, this administration has called for an unprecedented, first time ever cut to refugee admissions, all the way down to, I believe, I don't want to get this number wrong, but 45,000. This is the lowest number in the history of the refugee program of admissions of refugees to the United States. And now turning to what I will be speaking about in the next few slides is the end of DACA, right? I know that a lot of folks are familiar with the September 5th announcement that Sessions made with the full backing of this administration that DACA, or Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals, would be terminated. The administration attempted to frame this in the light of this is a toning down or slowing down of the program, which is not true. Could we go to the next slide? So with DACA and the end of the program that has basically been a form of protection for about 800,000 immigrant youth in this country since 2012, we pivoted to our Clean Dream Act campaign. Now I want to spend just a quick moment talking about what do we mean by Clean Dream Act. You'll hear that phrase quite a bit. It might sound funny at first, but I think here we are trying to push for a few things. Unfortunately, in this country, there has been a long time narrative that any kind of relief for one group of immigrants means that we have to go after another group of immigrants. In saying that, I mean that any kind of permanent relief tends to be coupled with buzzwords like border security, interior enforcement, which can mean a lot of things, anywhere from expanding detention camps to continuing to build a border wall to increasing the number of Border Patrol agents or ICE agents who are responsible for the raids that we have been seeing for quite a bit of time. I think it's important to kind of ground ourselves in this notion that that is unacceptable. We often say at United We Dream that the people who brought a lot of these young immigrant youth to this country were the original dreamers. They had a dream of living a better life, of first and foremost, seeing that their children succeeded. And we are finding that with this talk of border security and increased interior enforcement, this is going after the families, the loved ones, the communities of immigrant youth who would benefit from a DREAM Act. And for us, that is unacceptable. We can't live in a world where 800,000 to over 1 million immigrant youth are given protection through the DREAM Act, but their parents are at immediate danger because members of Congress have decided to add anti-immigrant provisions to a DREAM Act, like more agents or more money for border militarization. So again, to reiterate that is why when we say clean, we mean no dangerous enforcement measures that will violate the sanctity of our families. Now, I again want to state, we are pushing back against a long time narrative that permanent relief for one group means more need for protecting our quote unquote national security. And this is an uphill battle. I will be very honest. It's an uphill battle to work within a Republican administration and Republican-led Congress for pushing what is actually a bipartisan piece of legislation that would protect about 2 million immigrant youth. We never thought that we would be here in this moment, but the fact that we fight so hard for a clean DREAM Act only reflects the fact that we are at a place that we have never been before in this country. We have the most public support for a DREAM Act, and we have been able to garner the most support ever within Congress itself for passage of the DREAM Act. We know this from the fact that the DREAM Act is a bipartisan piece of legislation and that it has been introduced in both houses. And this movement has been going on for a while. Some of you may know that the DREAM Act was originally introduced in 2000, 2001. This has been a long multi-year battle, but we and our allies genuinely feel that this is the moment. This is the time. And if we are going to win this for our people, we want to win this for all of our people. A clean DREAM Act is the first step of many for ultimately the freedom of our broader immigrant community. Can you go to the next slide, please? So why now? I know that in quite a bit of our messaging and our communications, we have been calling for a hashtag DREAM Act now. for passage of a Clean Dream Act before the end of the year, right? And you know, it's tempting to focus on the fact that, oh yes, members of Congress are going home for the holidays, so this is a time, right? But I want to emphasize the fact that the now piece, the urgency piece, is not in fact related to our legislators. It is not in fact related to you know, the upcoming recess. The first priority are the people who have been affected by the end of DACA. CAP actually released a report, I believe this week, saying that 122 people are every day losing their DACA since the September 5th announcement. We have individuals on our United We Dream staff who are getting ready to lose their work permits within a few weeks. This is a real problem. This is an urgent crisis, right? And that's why we are calling for passing the Clean Dream Act now. It is on us as advocates, as change makers, as immigrant youth and allies to be the ones who are pushing policymakers to get this job done by the end of the year. We are seeing cases currently of DACA recipients who are already under attack despite having DACA or despite being able to qualify for the Dream Act. Some of you may have heard of the case of the 10-year-old Rosa Maria Hernandez, who would have qualified for the Dream Act. She was brought here with her family at the age of 3 months old. She was on her way to the hospital in an ambulance for emergency gallbladder surgery. And she was actually going through a checkpoint within the ambulance in Texas. And when they stopped at the checkpoint, CBP decided to follow the ambulance to the hospital where she was being treated and stand in front of the doors of her hospital room as she was being treated, as she was being checked in on. Rosa Maria was not allowed to see her family after emergency gallbladder surgery. She was actually taken into government custody and was kept in detention for about a week. And she was released last week to her parents, and now we are working with advocates to call for the closing up of her detention file. The other case that just recently came out this week is of 20-year-old Felipe Lopez. He has DACA, and he is differently abled and has been in ICE detention for about a month now. The news just came out as a result of his family's work on the ground and advocates in Texas who have been trying to uplift his story. This is a DACA recipient who has been detained. He has a legal right to work and to live freely in this country, and yet he is living in detention. So no matter what individuals say about the president perhaps extending DACA in March or being able to find a solution next year, the time is now to pass the DREAM Act, because these are not the only cases of DACA recipients or potential DREAM beneficiaries who are being targeted by deportation forces like ICE and CBP. Next slide, please. And this is just to give you all an idea. Since September 5th, 2017, CAP has calculated about over 8,500 individuals have lost their DACA. Next slide, please. So I want to just end with how we can take action, right? You know this information, you have been seeing it on the news, you've been hearing it in your advocacy meetings and your work on the ground, but I want to take this moment just to list out a few things that you can do to take action, knowing that the crisis is real and that we are all as advocates on the right side of history and we're ready to take action. We are pushing individuals to visit their members of Congress, especially with the Thanksgiving recess coming up. If you go to the website listed, unitedwedream.visitthem.org, you can figure out who your member of Congress is. If you don't already know them, push your own networks to visit this website. And once you sign up for a meeting, you can actually get access to resources on a Clean Dream Act. So we have one-pagers, we have a sample letter that you can bring to an office visit with you. We are pushing for member level visits, but of course, if you are able to get staff level visits, that is also very helpful. And we're just trying to get as many advocates from all across the coalition to do this work. Of course, we have our text in for updates about local actions near you. If you text DREAM Act now to 877-877, you will be I'm sorry for the noise on my end, but you will be cued into any kinds of events that are going on near you based on the zip code that you send to us over text. If you visit weareheretostay.org, you will be plugged into all of our activities and all of our actions. It's a great resource, especially if you know individuals with DACA or who are undocumented who need help, whether it means mental health resources, safe spaces, or information about what they should do in terms of employee rights, workplace rights, access to healthcare. This website is a great tool to pass on to those contacts. And I want to just end very quickly with, this sounds a bit cryptic, but if everybody would like to mark December 6th on your calendars, that will be 2 days before before our December 8th deadline for Congress to pass a Clean Dream Act. We are pushing folks to mark December 6th on your calendars, reserve that time for our national day, or next national day of action, I should say, to throw down with us and basically show in full force and in unison as a nation that we are all for pushing a Clean Dream Act before the end of the year. Thank you so much. And at the end, after Elizabeth's presentation, happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you so much, Sana. That was very informative and helping us putting this picture into real time. So now we're going to hear from Elizabeth and see how to put this large issue into the Jewish perspective and explain why this is so important to us as Reformed Jews. And again, if you have any questions for Sana or any other questions regarding the session, you are more than welcome to use the chat feature or the Q&A feature, and then we will have a Q&A session towards the end of the session. Okay, then I'm going to push it off to Elizabeth. Thank you.
Hi, everybody. Thank you again to Susanna and Allie and everyone at the WRJ for doing this. I think this webinar is an amazing thing that is reoccurring, and it's good to see it. And thank you again, Sana, for that detailed legislative update that'll really help us contextualize the issue within Judaism and within our own activism as Jews. So next slide, please. Great. So this text from Leviticus, I'm sure many of you have seen it many times. It is the main text that we've been using around this issue of immigrant justice and immigration reform. Just this idea of welcoming the stranger, and that is this rooted responsibility in the fact that we were once strangers in the land of Egypt. This comes up 36 times in the Torah, which is more than any other commandment. And that is an argument as to why this is such a pressing issue for us as Jews to take action on this idea of immigration reform. The Torah is very clear in the treatment of immigrants, and creating a fair immigration system in general is something that we value. And particularly at this moment in time, we see an opportunity to do something that can protect a lot of people, as Sana mentioned. Next slide, please. Great. Something that I do want to bring attention to is this idea around dreamers, as they are not strangers, right? So we're commanded to welcome the stranger, and yet here we are with these dreamers who are, for all intents and purposes, as American as me in a lot of ways, a lot of times. I'm not going to say that for everyone. I don't want to generalize dreamers. However, a lot of dreamers came here at a very young age, and they know no other home other than the United States, and they're American in all ways except that citizenship. Immigrants today and Jews throughout history share the story of exclusion and neglect and isolation, and we have a responsibility to act as Jews. We must ensure the fair treatment of all people and seek justice everywhere, wherever it's lacking. We realize that the DREAM Act itself, as a protection for dreamers, is one small step in the greater fight for immigration reform, but we feel that this issue affects a huge number of people with such a unique situation. And as I mentioned, the citizenship piece is something that's missing for a lot of these people who will go from being protected Americans to being not protected actually overnight, which is very scary and terrifying. So our own history as a Jewish people, as strangers, reminds us of the struggles that many people face today. And we affirm our commitment to create the same opportunities for today's immigrants that were so valuable to our own community not so many years ago. Next slide. Great. So the left side of this slide is maybe too much information, but important information that kind of highlights what the RAC has done historically to show that, or the reform movement rather, to show that we are committed to this issue of immigrant justice and immigration reform. That includes these 4 major resolutions that speak about immigration and citizenship and how we feel about pathways to citizenship, and that we feel that many people who've been in this country, whether under DACA or TPS, we feel that people should have the ability to earn their way into this country and not have roadblocks put up every 4 years or every 8 years. We support comprehensive immigration reform in the US, and again, we acknowledge that the DREAM Act is one small piece to that, but it is a fight that we are willing to put our time and resources into in the long term, and that's starting with huge mobilization efforts around the DREAM Act. So on the right side of the screen, we have recently unveiled this Urgency of Now campaign in response to the urgency of right now. So the Urgency of Now is an umbrella campaign, which is our strategy that we've developed towards connecting our legislative team here in DC to our organizing team in 5 different states and throughout our lay leadership in our communities and congregations. This is to ensure a multilateral approach to taking action on legislation that we feel protects the rights of the most vulnerable people at any given time. Right now, our 3 campaigns are transgender rights, immigrant justice, and criminal justice reform. The RAC has decided that immigrant justice required immediate and powerful mobilization efforts in order to protect the most vulnerable at the moment, which we feel are dreamers, and to push this piece of legislation through Congress, that being the DREAM Act of 2017, that we feel is imperative to further reform the immigration system in the United States. To be part of this campaign under the Urgency of Now, the Immigrant Justice Campaign, means working with a team in your congregation or Jewish community to take action on local, state, and federal levels while creating partnerships with organizations on the ground, United We Dream as an example. And that means also your team being committed to the RAC's overall messaging and action on the topic of immigrant justice. So that means working in partnership and also from the RAC's side to empower the communities who are taking leadership on this issue to participate in Social Justice Shabbat, for example, which happened last week. And I'll talk more about our current mobilization efforts around the DREAM Act in the next slide, but I also want to highlight this opportunity we've had to tap into the greater faith-based organizing that's been going on around the DREAM Act. There have been huge efforts around this piece of legislation, and we've been able to be a part of this quote-unquote moral voice that we're finding is such an important piece of persuading certain Congresspeople towards protecting this group of very, very vulnerable young people. We feel that our voice is taken seriously in Congress, and for a group of Muslims and Jews and Catholics and Protestants to walk into a room to lobby a congressperson and say, hello, we're here to talk about immigration. A lot of times we get, really? You're here to talk about immigration, not Israel or not this or that issue. And often it's very well received, and that's very, very good for us. The faith-based efforts have been promising, and that can happen on every level, and that is where the Urgency of Now campaign gives us the structure to do things like that. Next slide, please. Okay, This is, I will not read all of this out, but this is a kind of a timeline and thought process that's been behind how we harness the power of the full reform movement in North America around the DREAM Act as this issue that we've institutionally decided is the issue that we want to work on. So as Sana mentioned, the termination of the Deferred Action for Childhood Arrivals happened in September. And 1 month later, we launched this initiative around the DREAM Act, which we hoped would empower every Reformed Jew. Of course, that's hard to do, but that was our goal, really, to have this issue be in the minds of every Reformed Jew in the United States and inspire each one to take action on the issue. So a lot of what we've been doing is like releasing press releases, releasing the 10 Minutes of Torah, blog posts about different issues, all immigration, and a lot of times related to Jewish text that is relevant that week. We had a Facebook Live with Elias Rosenfeld, who's a Jewish dreamer, which was a very successful launching point for us and for our call-in day. This was important because it reminded the Jewish community that there's this other narrative involved in this DACA issue and the DREAM Act issue. To put another face to this and to put a Jewish face to this issue, I think could connect the dots for a lot of people. And that was an opportunity to highlight, like, yes, we care because this is a Jewish issue, because we have Jewish dreamers, and we care about this issue beyond the fact that Jews are affected. We've always cared about this issue, and it's something right now that is very, very important, and it's very urgent. And here is this young person, this young Jew, saying, in 6 months, I don't know where I will be. I am a part of your community now, and there is no promise of tomorrow, and that's terrifying. So that launched us into our Immigrant Justice Shabbat and our movement-wide call-in day. And now we're working in districts, actually having meetings with Congress people who we feel the moral voice from the Jewish community can be helpful in swaying them towards co-sponsoring the DREAM Act. And other efforts are unfolding in concert with our partners like United We Dream and a lot of other people on the ground. Next slide. Great. So what can we do? Big question. We can urge our representatives to pass the Bipartisan Clean DREAM Act of 2017. There are over 200 co-sponsors in the House of Representatives. There are not as many co-sponsors proportionally in the Senate. But whether you're calling your representative to ask them for a co-sponsor or you're calling your representative to thank them for their co-sponsorship, all of that positive language towards Congress is extremely important. And we have a call tool, which is on the next slide, please. Yes, so you can text either DREAM Act Now from Sana's side or Rack for Dream, which is helpful for us to track our calls to 877-877. And this will give you instructions on how to contact your congresspeople and urge them for the passage of the Clean DREAM Act. There's more information on that website, which is also on this slide, which you'll be receiving afterwards. So that is what I have to say. Thank you very much. I'm happy to answer questions at the end.
Thank you so much, Elizabeth. I think that really put our this large issue into perspective, and especially why is it important now, and why is it important now to us as Reformed Jews. So I appreciate your input. Now we're going to go into a part, so both Sana and Elizabeth gave very specific action steps, and I like to review those very briefly. So both gave information of how to contact your representatives to say how important it is to pass this Clean DREAM Act, either to just what Elizabeth just said, of either to help co-sponsor the bill or thank them for already co-sponsoring this very important bill. So I'd like to pose the question to both Elizabeth and Sana of what other resources and what other voices of action could go forth until this December 8th deadline.
I can go first if you want. A huge help on my end has been working with the Interfaith Immigration Coalition here in DC, which is, I think, more than 100, or maybe 50 or 100. That's a big difference. I'll answer that later. I'll find out. But it's a lot of faith-based organizations that solely focus their energy in this coalition on the issue of immigration and immigrant justice. And I think their resources are phenomenal, including their lobbying documents for like leave behind documents, or the stories that they have from dreamers who share their story and then they're published by the Interfaith Immigration Coalition. Their lobbying efforts are incredible, and tapping into those on my end has been great. And so I would say they're a great resource for anyone just going onto their website. Again, it's called the Interfaith Immigration Coalition.
Hey everyone, this is Sana. So I would say in terms of resources, yes, the Interfaith Immigration Coalition has been extremely helpful in this work, especially when it comes to mobilizing and getting local religious community groups to take action, right? Not only when it comes to visiting members of Congress and making those calls, but in terms of joining local actions, right? I fall back on weareheretostay.org just because that website is a coalition effort. It is hosted by, several organizations that all fall under what we call the Defend Our Dreams campaign. And I am happy to send the information for figuring out how you can be a part of those Defend Our Dreams calls that happen on a weekly basis to the facilitators, so that information can be forwarded to you if you're interested in getting kind of looped into that weekly work. And then I will also say, just as a recommendation, when it comes to bringing power to those meetings that you have with staff members and congressional offices or members of Congress, right now we're trying to push the urgency, right? And urgency right now is tied to the human crisis going on right now of individuals losing their protection from detention and deportation, right? So if you are already connected with local immigration groups in your community, local groups that represent the needs and the desires of undocumented people, it does not hurt to connect with them before these meetings and mention that you've set up a meeting with a local office and that you'd be happy to go in partnership with these groups, or if these groups have any directly affected folks who would like to come with you to those meetings. That's extremely powerful. We're finding that a lot of members of Congress, for them, it hasn't completely hit that DACA has ended for thousands of people. Whether that means that they're waiting for that date on that expiration date to pass within a few weeks or a few months, or the deadline or the expiration date has already passed. And to have individuals to come in and actually say to members of Congress face to face, I'm going to lose my DACA in a matter of 2 weeks or in a matter of 5 months, that is important, because that again speaks to the urgency of why now. So definitely recommend reaching out to community groups that represent immigrant communities wherever you happen to be. And of course, the We Are Here to Stay website.
Thank you so much. I think that was very helpful. So now we're going to push into the Q&A section of our webinar. So if you have any questions, please use the Q&A feature, and then Susanna will moderate this part of the session.
Hi. So we have one question so far. The question is, what is the legal basis for detaining a valid Daca recipient? Are these detentions a matter of overreaching enforcement, or are they based on a legal argument or policy? So Sana or Elizabeth, if either of you feel that you could answer, please go ahead.
Sure. This is Sana. I always use this disclaimer when it comes to questions like this. I am not a lawyer, but I can give examples. So to answer the question, there is no legal basis for detaining Daca recipients. For example, the example that I gave of Felipe, Felipe has no criminal background, no history, no criminal history. And he was detained despite having a valid work permit, a valid DACA. It was not expired, and yet he has been detained for over a month now, right? I think you spoke to this in the question, which is like, this is a matter of overreach. This is a matter of the hateful rhetoric against immigrant communities from the Trump administration trickling down into the foot soldiers of DHS. In this case, they were Border Patrol who detained Felipe, right? We do know that there was a memo that was circulated throughout CBP after the September 5th announcement, asking for CBP officers on the ground to view with more scrutiny individuals with DACA, but there was nothing in the memo that stated that people with valid DACA should be detained, right? There was a piece in the memo asking for more screening of those recipients, but a lot of these checkpoints that we see within 100 miles of the border, all of the questioning, all of the detainments, the stopping of individuals as they go through those checkpoints, those are on the basis of what CBP calls reasonable suspicion. And I'm sure all of you can understand what that means. It is on the basis of long time, discriminatory thoughts and practices that unfortunately come to fruition in the form of detaining an individual like Felipe for a month, right? So I think this question is a very good one, and it speaks to the fact that the detentions are happening, the deportations are happening. There was a deportation of a DACA recipient this past summer, Juan Manuel Montes, based in California, where CBP officers simply walked him over the border and deported him without any due process. And unfortunately, regardless of the fact that he had DACA, he was deported, right? So there is a serious problem happening right now, and the DREAM Act is just one of the first steps that we can take to providing that solid, blanket protection for over 1 million youth.
Great, Sana, thank you so much. We have another question. If a sisterhood or others want to invite a dreamer to speak to their group, is there a network for them to contact to arrange that? And is it safe for dreamers to speak publicly about their situation?
Hi, this is Sana again. So I think to first respond to the second question, where is it safe, right? I think with situations like these, whenever it comes to anybody who is speaking on behalf of their community who feels that they are being targeted, especially in this case by the federal government, this is always this is a consideration to make on a person by person basis, right? Before inviting an individual to speak at an event who may have DACA or who may not have DACA and qualifies for DREAM, it's always important to have that first story sharing conversation. Make them feel comfortable, share your own story about why you're an advocate and why you're fighting for this, right? Get to know them, and also make sure that they understand that they're not just story sharers. They are a lot more than that they're change makers as well as the rest of us, right? This isn't a matter of going around in a circle and sharing our stories and feeling bad. This is a matter of using stories as power and figuring out what we can do to actually make effective and progressive policy changes, right? As for inviting individuals to speak to groups, I am not aware of like a broad nationwide network that individuals can plug into, but I would say the first step would be to figure out locally if there are groups in your area that do this kind of work on immigration, or do any kind of like work with undocumented youth. Those are great to plug into. And of course, United We Dream, if you find that you're having trouble finding those local community groups, then you can just email us at info@unitedwedream.org for any kind of assistance you might need.
Hey, it's Elizabeth. Just to add to that, also, the RAC has a lot of relationships as well with whether that's Dreamers or organizations that work closely with Dreamers. So reaching out to us as well is always a good move, especially with the in-state organizers that we have as well. So both great resources. And yeah. Next question.
Great. Thank you both so much. We have another few questions. What is the role of sanctuary cities and states, and what are they doing to address the DACA deportations and detentions?
Yeah, so I think when it comes to, sorry, this is Sana again. When it comes to the subject of sanctuary cities in particular, this work that is being done on the ground by a lot of community and advocacy groups to ensure that their cities are open and stand against hate toward immigrant communities, that is extremely important, right? And I want to state here that when it comes to anybody who is involved in sanctuary cities work, that the work should not stop at simply a resolution or a proclamation by the mayor that this city is a safe space, right? We have, for example, a very good example is New York City, right? New York City is considered a sanctuary city, but there are still detentions and deportations that happen in the city of New York. Jumping a turnstile on the subway, not paying the fare, that is considered a deportable offense. I get this information, I want to attribute this information to one of our affiliates on the ground there, Daci's Rising Up and Moving, and that does a lot of work with undocumented South Asian immigrants and has been working on cases in the city of New York when it comes to deportation proceedings. So I know this isn't a complete answer, but it's on us, it's on community advocates who are working locally in our cities. If they do identify as sanctuary cities, if these kinds of cases are happening where people are being detained, they're being stopped and asked for their country of origin, or they are being placed into deportation proceedings, it's on actors like us to come in and hold our local communities accountable for the resolutions that they may have passed or the words that mayors may have expressed, right? It's not enough to just say that these are sanctuary cities. We have to continually work to get them to act in defense of the individuals who are being targeted, whether they have DACA or whether they are simply undocumented immigrants.
Hey, this is Elizabeth. Just to add to that as well, within any state that I'm aware of at this point, a faith organization or faith-based building, for example, like a synagogue or a church, can qualify or declare itself as a sanctuary building. And if you would like further information on how you in your synagogue or your Jewish community can figure out how to be a sanctuary synagogue, let me know. I would be happy to connect you with sanctuary synagogues. There's one in DC at least, so happy to talk further about that and how you and your community can take action and physically protect people from deportation.
Thank you both so much for those wonderful answers. We really appreciate it. And I think that is all for questions, unless there are any last ones. I don't think so, but we are happy to continue this conversation after the webinar. You can sign up for WRJ advocacy alerts by emailing Allie. Her email is on the screen now. And as both of our speakers have mentioned, we can put you in touch with them and their organizations and other advocates if you have interest in getting more involved and getting your congregations or sisterhoods more involved. So thank you to both Sana and Elizabeth for those extremely informative and helpful presentations that, really offered us guidance on how we can get involved in this very, very important fight. And thank you to all of our participants for joining. We appreciate you taking the time, and we look forward to our next installment of the webinar and to your continued involvement.
Yes, thank you so much, Susanna. Thank you to Elizabeth and Sana and all of our attendees today. Our next webinar will be in January, and we'll be focusing on reproductive rights. There will be no webinar in December due to biennial, but if any of you are joining us at biennial, very exciting. Thank you so much, and I hope to see you at our pay equity sessions there. Thank you, and a recording of this webinar will be available to you, and you'll also receive an email from me later today with all of WRJ's information and both ways to connect with Sana and Elizabeth following this discussion. Thank you so much and have a great day.